injured. But this seemed to pass without any press attention, or I shouldn't say any because I'm reading news reports on it, but with minimal press attention. And I have to wonder, when are we going to switch to some of these national security issues that involve our troops on the front lines fighting Iraq and Afghanistan? That is still happening. We have troops in harm's way in both countries. You've got Iraqi troops doing the bulk of the fighting in Mosul, and this has been underway for many weeks now. And Mosul is a city that is bisected by the Tigris River. And the eastern part of Mosul, they've thought would be the less heavy fighting. The western bank of the Tigris, the western part of Mosul, is where it is more likely that there will be even higher casualties per square block, that the fighting will intensify. And the Iraqi government, with this 100,000-person force, seems to be in a position where it can continue on as is and will take back this territory, but at considerable cost. This is a huge battle that's underway in the Mosul crucible, and there's not much attention being paid to any of this. I mean, the fighting to retake Mosul from the Islamic State is slow, it's difficult, it's bloody. And here we are months into this campaign with over 100,000 Iraqi security forces and militia starting out around the city. And we finally have the eastern portion largely in government hands. And remember, this is the fight against ISIS. Trump always talks about how he's going to destroy ISIS. He's going to take it right to him. He's going to make sure that we annihilate radical Islam, and the Islamic State is now the most visible manifestation of jihadism in the world. And we've got Mosul slowly finding its way back into the hands of the Iraqi government. You read the stories from reporters who are on the front lines who are witnessing all of this, and there are people who, when they come out of their homes, they are blinded temporarily by the sunlight because they've been hiding in completely dark rooms with no windows or in basements. They're hiding from the Islamic State thugs who will go house to house and murder people who are suspected of insufficient loyalty to the collapsing Islamic State. They stay away from windows because they don't want to be hit by shrapnel. They don't want to get hit by an errant bullet, and there's a lot of street-to-street fighting that's going on between the Iraqi forces and the Islamic State fighters. And retaking the city has been a very difficult slog for the Iraqi military, with the U.S. playing a much less visible role, but an essential one. There are U.S. special forces who are working right alongside some of these Iraqi units, and they're helping with airstrikes. U.S. airstrikes have proved essential in this campaign. One of the major tactics that the Islamic State really honed in the last couple of years is the usage of vehicles in complex maneuvers to knock down barriers and then bring in a large explosive payload in the back of a vehicle-borne improvised explosive device, a VBIED or an SVBIED, if there's the driver still in it, which usually there is. And that's been the biggest problem that the forces in Mosul have run into. You can shoot a driver, but if you're shooting him when he's 50 or 100 feet away and he's got 1,000 pounds of explosive in the trunk and shrapnel, well, the whole vehicle turns into shrapnel, or at least parts of the vehicle turn into shrapnel at that point. And if he's packed it with some ball bearings and other things to increase the shrapnel effect, you can have a very deadly weapon. It's hard to deal with because, of course, there are cars in the city of Mosul. Mosul's a pretty large city, certainly by Iraqi standards. It's about 800,000 people, give or take. And you have tens of thousands that have had to flee their homes, tens of thousands that have, with winter underway, I should say, very little in the way of fuel, very little in the way of food. There's really no medical care to speak of. And there's a humanitarian disaster looming because you may have hundreds of thousands of civilians caught on the west bank of the Tigris River in this increasingly desperate resistance from these Islamic State fighters. And I would just say that, the Iraqi government and its allies are in the midst of quite a test here. And the rest of Iraq and the rest of the Middle East, and in some ways the world, is watching this, although the rest of the world is not watching this with the degree of attention that I think they should or that they would. This would be, once they finally take back this city, the most single crushing blow against the Islamic State. And the ISIS fighters are not in any position to do anything other than just increase the casualties of the Iraqi government and achieve martyrdom now. But what happens not just in the waning days of this battle with Iraqi forces, I mean, the counterterrorism service, which is the best of the Iraqi military, those counterterrorism troops have taken a beating, taken very high casualties, and doing a lot of the fighting. You have Shia militias that are around the city and providing security and securing the perimeter, but they don't really want them in the midst of this Sunni majority city because of the sectarian tensions that would certainly flare up from that. And there are those in Mosul, there are Sunni Arabs in Mosul who are going to be very happy to see the Islamic State gone, but they don't want Shia militias, some of whom have blood of innocent Sunni Arab Iraqis on their hands already. They don't want them walking the streets of Mosul. So the way this is conducted, with weeks, maybe months, but with weeks left to go in this fight, it'll probably be a few months, matters. Every aspect of this fight matters, because this is primarily a military operation, but it is really also part of a larger propaganda and public perception war. You see, this is about much more than just retaking a city from ISIS. The campaign in Mosul is the centerpiece of a much-needed national narrative of sectarian unity. They have to bring together all these different factions, Sunni, Shia, and Kurd. And in Mosul, this is the mobilization of those forces together in one common purpose, driving the Islamic State out. And you finally have a situation where they are working in concert. There has been maybe a minimum is too strong a way to put it, but there's certainly not been there have not been large-scale sectarian reprisals. There haven't been a lot of heavy casualties taken in sectarian fighting against the different forces. So they are focused on taking out ISIS. And Prime Minister Abadi has this unwieldy coalition of Kurd, Sunni, and Shia. And they're all allied in this patriotic effort to get the Islamic State to get off of Iraqi soil. That's really what this boils down to. They can push them across the border, push them out, or kill them in the case of Mosul. A lot of them are dead enders. They're not going to go willingly. They want to go down in a martyrdom operation of one kind or another. But the success of this indigenous multi-sectarian Iraqi force is in liberating Mosul from ISIS occupiers. This is the kind of political capital the government in Baghdad is really going to need. And if a Trump administration is going to create a much more hopeful and stable Iraq than what we've seen in recent years under the Obama administration, there's a real moment of opportunity here. But it's an opportunity that could quickly slip out of the Iraqi government's grasp if they don't seize it. And I don't get the sense, and look, I'm not involved in discussions at the Pentagon or CIA or White House, obviously, so I don't know. I don't get the sense the administration has much of a focus on this at all. Now, certainly the commanders on the ground on the U.S. side and working with allied commanders have an excellent view of this, and they have their mission. They understand what they're trying to accomplish there. But this is where the vision of a particularly strong Secretary of Defense and also an adept commander-in-chief could be really valuable. So the way that this coalition of generally unwilling partners, Sunni, Shia, Kurd, comes together in the latter stages of the Mosul operation when the fighting is going to get more intense. And then, of course, after that, you're going to have the hold part of the clear and hold operation, where some force is going to be walking the streets dealing with continued attacks from ISIS fighters who have melted back into the civilian population, although that's not going to be as easy as some might think. The overwhelming sentiment you get from all the reports of the population in Mosul is that they hate the Islamic State. They want them gone. And anyone who was walking around with a beard and an AK and part of the tyranny of ISIS in Mosul is going to have a very hard time turning around and all of a sudden pretending that everything's fine and he's just another guy. There are some tragic outcomes from this, though, that are also plausible. The urgency of the Islamic State threat has eclipsed these sectarian tensions momentarily. But there are plenty of ways for the Mosul operation and its immediate aftermath to turn into a sectarian nightmare. You have these popular mobilization units, which are the Shia militias. PMUs it's a rebranding, and it's quite a rebranding of Shia militias. And they include militants that have been accused of war crimes in previous cases. So what happens with them after ISIS is gone is going to be an essential data point, and that's going to really play a large role in determining the success or failure of this operation over the long term. So if there are anti-Sunni reprisals or if entire blocks are callously raised with heavy weapons, Iraq's sectarian divide could turn into a chasm very quickly. Now, these are the notes I've been taking for myself, by the way. I'm sharing some of this with you because I'm thinking about writing a broader analytic piece on Mosul, and I wanted to make sure I really hit all the different facets of it. This is a much more important story than you'd gather from watching the news, and what's going on in Afghanistan is also not getting coverage, and I'm telling you, they're going to start covering Afghanistan when it's obvious that there's big problems there, it's falling apart, and they're going to, and immediately the silence that they've had in the media on Afghanistan for a while will be a means of transferring any blame for Afghanistan to Trump. It'll just be, oh, well, look, Afghanistan's falling apart on Trump's watch. It's been allowed to deteriorate under Obama's watch without a peep from the media. And with Mosul, I think they're waiting to see this play out because they're hoping that there's an opportunity here. If things go bad with the stabilization operation of Mosul after they've cleared out ISIS, they're going to want to put this at the Trump administration's doorstep and say that this is Trump's fault and that he's an inept and incompetent commander-in-chief. So the media is playing games with all this stuff. But I want to keep you up to speed on it as much as I can. It's important to watch. The fight against ISIS is very much still underway. Team phone lines open, 888-900-3393. Be back in just a few.
Buck Sexton, the Blaze Radio Network.
You're listening to the Buck Sexton Show, only on the Blaze Radio Network.
Team, I mentioned what's going on in Afghanistan. You've got the Taliban just yesterday releasing this letter that they're telling Trump it's time for the U.S. to leave Afghanistan. This is from ABC News. The letter, emailed to journalists, was written on behalf of the so-called Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Zabihullah Mujahid, the Taliban spokesman, warned Trump that peace will be elusive as long as foreign troops are on Afghan soil. And he adds that independence from foreign dominance is the only asset that an impoverished nation like Afghanistan truly has. So this was written in English, Pashto, and Dari, the two biggest languages spoken in Afghanistan are Dari and Pashto. And it went on at some length about Afghanistan's history and invading armies. And the position of the coalition in Afghanistan is not good right now. There are a lot of problems. The Taliban has control outside of the cities in the south, so in provinces like Helmand and Kandahar, and you're just not hearing about it. They're doing this pretty quietly because they realize that with a new administration coming in here, they want to create both facts on the ground and then create their own perception for what Afghanistan is, or what's going on in Afghanistan right now. So there are some very serious issues that are coming up right now. I don't know what the Trump plan for Afghanistan is going to be. If we pull out U.S. troops right now, this thing is going to go to hell in a handbasket very quickly. and it's a major concern. Obama did not end the war in Iraq or the war